Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show in this edition of Hot Topics in Leadership. I'm very excited to be joined today by retired Major General Gregg Sturdevant, who is also the founder and CEO of Mission Critical Leadership Solutions. How are you doing today, sir?
Andy, I'm doing great. I want to thank you for having me on your show today.
Well, I want to first of all thank you for 37 years of military service to this country. Kudos for that.
Thanks. I appreciate that. When I enlisted in high school back in 1970 something, I had no idea that the career would last as long as it did. And I tell you what, I had great opportunities along the way, took advantage of them. When I enlisted in the Marine Corps, one less mouth to feed, I needed to grow up, and I really was looking for a way to fund a college education. So I got all three of those. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I read about that in your book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Awesome information. And your book is titled Mission Critical Leadership, Marine Corps Leadership Principles to Transform, Motivate, and Lead Your Teams to Success. So what inspired you to write that book?
So, here you touched on the 37 years in uniform. After I left active duty, we moved to Tampa, Florida, and I was just kind of putzing around the house for a while. And one day on LinkedIn, I get a LinkedIn notification, jobs you might be interested in. And there was a large defense contractor that actually had a position here in Tampa. And I had no idea that they were even here in Tampa. It turns out it was a subsidiary. And better yet, one of my old squadron mates was the president and CEO of that portion of the company. So I reached out to him and I went to work for this particular company. And I worked for them for about 2.5 years. And it was overall was a pretty good experience, but I left there, and we can talk more about that here in a couple of minutes. And I went to another company, completely different market from where I just come from. But I will tell you, in both instances, the people I worked with, I really enjoyed, but the leadership was lacking in both companies, and just bad behavior across the board. And, I argue when I'm up in front of an audience, and it's not just talking about military, it doesn't matter where you're at, everybody deserves good leadership. All right. That's part of, I think, if you're my boss, Andy, that's what I expect from you. All right. That's one of your responsibilities, is to lead us effectively and be empathetic along the way. And you don't always see that. So, bad behavior, I'm going, look, there's leadership lessons I learned in the Marine Corps that translate to the private sector. And there's something that to be gained here. So that's why I wrote the book, out of frustration.
Well, I've experienced, both good leadership and bad leadership. I love the idea of inspiring others, getting people involved. You talk about that. But having a vision and communicating that as well is extremely important. So you and I are going to be talking about hot topics in leadership today, along with some secrets to success. So there's a section of your book titled, What Worked in the Past Isn't Going to Work in the Future. Can you tell us about that?
Right. Okay. So in the book, I talk about 4 leadership tenets, and number 3 is working smarter, not harder. Right. And it's tied to limited resources. Right. I mean, there's not a company out there that's going to tell you, I got too many people. I've got too much money. No, it's not happening. So how do you work smarter, not harder? Right. And doing the same thing over and over again. And that's one of the reasons why that first company that I worked for, after I left active duty, after I got to the 2.5-year mark, and my job was to sell aviation simulation cockpit simulators, right? Aviation cockpit simulators to the Department of Defense. And we didn't have anything for them. All right. We had something we had done in the past, and it kept going, this is the direction we need to go. And I'm going, nope, the times have changed. If you've heard of virtual reality simulation, right? Virtual reality simulation is taking over training. It's doctors, veterinarians, nurses, truck drivers, pilots, everybody and their brother, virtual reality simulation. And I could not convince this company that we needed to shift gears. No, we're going to do what we've always done. It's worked for us in the past. It's going to work for us in the future. And no, it's not going to work. There are very few companies that are still around today that are doing exactly what they were doing 100 years ago or 50 years ago. Most of these companies, they look at Kodak, all right, with Kodachrome. Who's got film these days? I mean, it's all my photos are right here on my phone.
Right.
And you've got to be able to shift gears. And I think it's important. We touch on that at the end of the book as well about the learning piece, but you got to continue to evolve. We need to evolve personally. The company needs to evolve as well. And that's why, part of the sales team, part of our job is, the voice of the customer. And when I come back and I tell you, this is what the customer is looking for. No, that's not, we know better. Like, you're killing me. So, we got to a point where my wife said, you're done. I'm tired of watching you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and try and, run through what argument do I need to present to convince them that doing what we've done in the past is going to work in the future.
Right. Absolutely. And I've run into that a lot over the years. It's like analysis paralysis. And
right.
we'll probably talk about that a little bit here as well.
Hey, real quick, Andy, quick on that smarter, not harder piece, though. But, when I plugged that into the 4 points, that number 3 being smarter, not harder, it was all tied to older folks. All right. People that have been around the industry, in this case, the Marine Corps, for a long period of time. That's the way we've always done it. Doesn't make it right. Back to, you've got to continue to evolve. You got to continue to be relevant. People like me, as you start to get older, if you don't evolve, you're not going to be relevant, and you're going to get pushed aside. So I'm sorry to cut you off. Back to you.
No, I agree completely. Totally. Great piece of advice there. You really have to always be changing and learning. And that's why I enjoyed reading your book. I love books on leadership, sales, marketing. I've got quite a collection, but really enjoyed your leadership principles that you shared, as well as just other things you talk about with teamwork and some other things. So that segues into our next topic, basically. What would you say are 2 key challenges facing executives today in terms of leadership?
Okay, so one of them you just touched on right before I cut you off, in the analysis paralysis piece. But I tell you what, I thought about that some more, and it goes a little bit deeper, because it really is. It's about risk identification, risk tolerance. And, I tell you, the companies that are moving forward are ones that are taking measured risk. And that was some of the same thing I saw in these companies that I was working for, where the analysis, by paralysis by analysis, at some point you got to go, no, I got it. I mean, I've seen this enough times. I see a pattern here between that and just using some common sense and some other things. I'm ready to move forward. It's not reckless. I got to go to the board of directors and sell my idea. This isn't reckless behavior. This is a calculated risk. And here's what we expect the return on investment to be. And you really got to work through that. And so part of my challenge with both those companies was figuring out exactly what their risk tolerance was. And there are times where you got to push them a little bit. I mean, as a retired general officer, there were times where I was coaching up. All right. And it was kind of different than, I'm sure it was a little bit of a head scratcher, but hey, boss, for example, in one case, I talked to one of my bosses. I said, I need you to act like a general. And they kind of looked at me and I go, that doesn't mean going around giving orders. What I need you to do is get out of our business. I need you to go sit in your office and think about the direction this company needs to go and how we're going to get there. Right? I need you to look to the future. If you're sitting here and you're involved in day-to-day operations, nobody's looking to the future of this company. Right? And we will not survive if somebody's not looking downrange. We're going back to, we've always, no, we're not doing the same thing we've done every day for the last 20 years. What's coming next? And you got to be thinking about that. So there's that piece. And then the other thing, and you and I touched on this right before we came on the air, the remote work piece, because I watched both companies that I work for really struggle with that idea that somebody could work remote and still be an individual contributor, right? How do you contribute to the team if you're working remote? And, it depends on, well, for one, how much overhead you want. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different factors. I would argue all day long that people working remote is not a bad thing. And I used to have to defend my sales team who were all remote. Just because you can't see them sitting here and you're in this seat doesn't mean they're not being productive. And what absolutely boggled my mind, in one of the companies I worked for, it was more of a butt in a seat. It was strictly, are they here at work today? Yes, they're in their seat from 8 to 5. I'm not sure they actually had to do anything, but they were there from 8 to 5. Therefore, they get credit. as opposed to performance-based, right? Which is really what it should be all about. You're on salary, working, you're getting paid for 40 hours a week. If you get your work done in 35 hours a week and it's it's acceptable and suitable, we're good to go. Maybe you get 5 hours more time with your family. And that's why you love working for this company, because I can get my 40 hours of work done in 35 hours and I get 5 extra hours with my family. Wow. It's not hard. So, this is one positive, and I'm sure there's others that have come out of COVID-19, but companies are being forced to recognize and realize that you can still move forward with a workforce that works remote.
Absolutely. I've been super fortunate to work in 9 countries during my career. Most of that was before I was married. I couldn't get away with that anymore. But I used to travel overseas for 3 to 4 months at a time. And I had objectives and a vision of what needed to be done. And then the people that I was working for, fortunately, I would touch base with about once a week, but we got things done and we expanded projects and kept going. And, I'm really fortunate that I had some good leaders that I worked with at that time. In terms of success, what are 2 or 3 key things that people in executive leadership positions should know?
Okay, I will. All right, so you just touched on one of them. Well, won't be my first point, it'll be my second point, I think. The first point, and this is my number one point of the 4 leadership philosophy points I make, setting people up for success. Right, and I watch, and I think the military does a pretty good job of that. We'll talk about leadership from day one, from the day you start training in whatever branch of the service you're in. You go to boot camp or officer candidate school, you start to get trained on leadership. And that education continues throughout the course of your career. And that doesn't necessarily translate over to the private sector as far as training goes. You may get a promotion and you get more responsibility, but you may or may not get training that's tied to that job title. And I was talking to a buddy of mine recently, and he goes, of all the people that perform the same role I do at this particular company that I work for, and it's a large company, he says, I'm the only one that received any leadership training. Everybody else who was, and they're all team leaders and they're not getting training. So, it's setting people up for success and recognizing that your success is based on your team's success. If they're not successful, you'll never be successful. So that number one obligation, if things aren't going well, you need to go look in the mirror and ask yourself, if you're having a problem with an employee, have I set that person up for success? Do they have the education, right? Or whether it's a high school degree, a GED, a high school diploma, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, do they have the education to do the job? Have I given them the training to do the job? Are they a good fit? And if the answer is, no, then maybe you need to do something about that. So number one, I think, is setting your team up for success. The second one, and this is what you were just talking about, where you were working remote and the boss said, hey, I got a vision. He shared that vision, or she shared that vision with you. And then they allowed you to do your thing. And you would circle back once a week or so and check in with them. And that's, that goes back to the point I made a minute ago about acting like a general. Empower, right? You empower your team. And you get out of their way. And by doing that, I'm going to give you some responsibility. All right. I'm going to empower you to get this job done. I'm going to show you that I trust you because I'm going to get out of the way. I'm going to hold you accountable to get this task performed, but I'm not going to hold your hand. And I'm going to get, and I used to tell people when they would check in, if I was in the commanding officer of the squadron, for example, a new officer would check in and I would tell them, I have a hard enough time doing my own job. I don't have time to do your job for you. You do your job, I'll do mine. We'll get along fabulously. And they appreciated that. And afterwards, they go, sir, I really appreciate the fact you allowed me to do my job. You trusted me. Exactly. And if you're not meeting the mark, we'll have a private conversation and we'll, here's what needs to be done to improve your performance. Or in one case, or actually more than one, I had to move people around. Are you happy in your present role? No, I'm not. Okay. I didn't think so. I could tell, we'd have that conversation. We do a little bit of negotiation and you would get that person moved to a spot where they were a better fit. Because unlike the private sector in the military, you don't do a whole lot of hiring and firing. You usually play the hand you're dealt. So it's about managing personalities and getting, and I think that's one of the things that is probably a strength for people coming out of the military, just the people skills, because you're forced to figure out if you're paying attention to what's going on, you really care you do take the time to learn your people, their strengths and weaknesses, and you put them in position where they can succeed, and you can, give them the job to do and show that you trust them and let them do their thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Great words of advice there. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in executive leadership positions that feel like, and I feel this way, I'm the CEO of a company. I want to be involved in every little thing, but you can't. You just cannot. And
Right.
have a successful, growing, thriving company. And it's one of the hardest things to do is let go.
Absolutely. And that's a huge challenge for entrepreneurs. That I've been here since day one, and it's my company, I've grown. Yeah, but in order for it to grow, if you're happy with it being a little mom and pop, whatever, you're good to go. If you want it to grow, you've got to let go of some of the reins, and it's hard. And I understand that. I want, everybody wants to be in control. I got it. But letting go sometimes is not a bad thing.
Absolutely. I think it's needed in order to grow.
Absolutely.
So, well, what would you say? Well, actually, let me ask you one thing first. What are the best ways for people to connect with you?
So the best way, you can find me on LinkedIn, right? Gregg Sturdevant. You can find me, my website, www.missioncriticalcoaching.net. All right. And on there's a place to connect, or you can just reach out via email. And I can try and keep it simple, Greg@missioncriticalcoaching.net.
Very good. And that's Greg with 2 G's.
Yeah, very important. Gregg.
Absolutely.
Lifelong friends who still don't know how to spell my name. So thank you for that.
What would you say as a final word of advice for our friends out there listening or watching today?
Okay, so, and I appreciate that question. So this is one, all right, there's the copy of the book in the very last chapter, right? Leaders never stop learning. And you touched on that, Andy. You talk about how much you read on leadership and the various business aspects. Never stop learning. And that's part of it. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You should never stop learning. We should always be inquisitive. And I think that's important. We're reading, we're learning, we're going after and finding a subject we don't know a whole lot about. We're maybe pulling up a YouTube video, watching, learning. But great leaders never stop learning. And I think that's important, because if you stop learning, you become stale. And like we said a few minutes ago, you are no longer relevant. And that's the last place you want to be. We want to continue to contribute right up till we take our last breath. So stay busy, keep learning.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that. Got to always be learning and expanding and moving forward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So great advice. And I just want to say thanks again, first of all, for your military service. Really appreciate that. And also thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much, Andy. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Hot Topics in Leadership. Take care, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.